Welcome students to our third video lecture in our coverage of Chapter 10. In this video, we're going to shift slightly beyond the idea of choice behavior and matching behavior and on towards the concept of self-control. And a critically important question to ask yourself when it comes to the topic of self-control is, what is self-control? What does that mean? What does it mean to have self-control? Frequently, when we discuss the topic of self-control and we describe somebody as having self-control, we reference some sort of internal state that is referred to as willpower. A person with self-control, with strong self-control, has strong willpower. But what willpower is problematic because it doesn't have a ready operational definition. It's not something that can be measured. And frequently when we talk about a person with good or bad self-control or strong or weak willpower, we use circular arguments to justify what it is that we're even talking about. Frequently I ask students what their goals are for a semester, and they say to do well. And then you say, well, what does it mean to do well? And it's to study harder and get better grades. Well, how will you know that you did that? Well, I will have better grades. And the same situation with the idea of self-control. This individual accomplished some difficult feat. Well, how did they accomplish this difficult feat? It's because they had strong willpower. Oh, well, how do you know that they had strong willpower? Well, we know they had strong willpower because they accomplished this difficult feat, right? And so it's circular line of reasoning, and it's really difficult to identify what is self-control and what is willpower. They are these internal attributes that we assign to other people to explain their behavior. And the reality of the matter is we don't know what self-control is. We don't know what willpower is. And there's a good chance that neither of these things is even real. You don't actually have self-control. Willpower is something that's just made up. B.F. Skinner had a different perspective on the idea of self-control. In fact, B.F. Skinner flat out argues there is no such thing as self-control, and there is absolutely no such thing as willpower. Rather, there is self-management. And as with everything Skinner emphasized, his perspective was self-management is all about focusing on the external event, and that external event is the outcome of that behavior, or rather, the outcome of that choice. And so here's where self-control, or self-management as Skinner called it, relates to the topic of this chapter. Self-management is really the matter of how we manage the competition between conflicting outcomes. And Skinner emphasized the environment as the method by which we can manage conflicting outcomes. Skinner had a couple of ideas about how we can manage conflicting outcomes. Environmental change is the easiest way to do this. Literally physically alter the environment and you alter your behavior. If you are trying to lose weight, you can alter your environment by not having certain foods available to you in your home. If you don't have those foods, you can't eat those foods. And therefore, it's a whole lot easier to eliminate one of the conflicting outcomes for maintaining your diet. And then this concept of self-control, well, you don't need self-control because if there are no cookies to eat, you cannot, you don't have that alternative. Another way to manipulate the environment or to change this competition is to alter the value of the reward. And so for Skinner, this is looking at the idea of deprivation versus satiety. If you are hungry, how many of these delicious Girl Scout cookies on the screen here would you consider eating? But what if you were full? Then how would that work? So we can manipulate reward value in order to change the conflicting outcomes here. Another method that Skinner offered was the opportunity to essentially do something else. So have an alternative activity or an alternative behavior. We've sort of mentioned this before when we talked about reinforcement of differential behaviors, for example. If we have an alternative, and especially if we have an alternative that conflicts with a behavior we don't want, then again, this concept of self-control is eliminated and we're managing the possible outcomes that exist. So the easy example is when we're dealing with anxiety-related issues, we can't be anxious and relaxed at the same time, right? And so Skinner's idea of having an alternative activity, the opportunity to do something else, relates back specifically to this. We can't be eating a bunch of cookies if we are at the gym working out. The last idea that Skinner talks about is the idea of either self-reinforcement or self-punishment. And this is the one that is probably the most common to us, the one that we try to employ the most, and it's also likely the one that we fail at the most, because it's an extremely weak contingency. You can say, if I eat all of the Girl Scout cookies, I will then have to go to the gym and run on the treadmill for 45 minutes. What's to prevent you from just eating the cookies and not following through on the punishment? There's nothing to stop you. Likewise, with self-reinforcement, I'm going to allot myself 30 minutes of TV watching for having studied for a class for 45 minutes. Again, what's to prevent you from skipping the studying and just watching the TV anyway? The somewhat ironic outcome of this arrangement is that the individuals that are going to use self-reinforcement or self-punishment effectively are those same individuals that we would say have high levels of self-control, and now we're right back where we started with this circular argument. So a better approach to self-reinforcement and or self-punishment is to bring in another party. You can tell your roommate, hey, if I eat all the Girl Scout cookies, then I have to go to the gym and run on the treadmill for 45 minutes. I'm going to make sure that you enforce this. Or I'm going to give you the remote control to the TV, and I'm going to study for 45 minutes. And if I study for 45 minutes, then I get to watch TV. And if I don't, you're going to be the one who prevents me. So taking the reinforcement or the punishment out of your own hands is one way to do this effectively, but then we need reliable people around us as well. So the question of this nebulous concept of self-control is why? Why is it that we have poor self-control? This is probably a universal feature of human behavior, and I think the argument can be made it's a universal feature of animal behavior in general. We don't manage our own behavior well. Why does this happen? One of the leading ideas on the issue of self-management and behavioral management is that time is the issue. The root of the problem appears to be temporal. And the reason that the root of the issue is temporal is when we are faced with these choices that tend to be regulated by what we are calling self-control, really what we're looking at is a scenario where we're having to make a decision between something that happens, something that's available right now, or something that's potentially available in the future. So let's get to some common abbreviations that we'll use through the end of this chapter. An SSR stands for a smaller, sooner reward, and an LLR stands for a larger, later reward. Likewise, an SSP is a smaller, sooner punishment, and an LLP is a larger, later punishment. The reality of what's happening here is that whatever you want to call it, your behavior is strongly influenced by the SSR and weakly influenced by the LLR. And really what it looks like is individuals that we say have strong willpower, quote unquote, or who have good self-control, really it's that they're able to forego the smaller, sooner reward in favor of the larger, later reward. This also applies to punishment. We are much more likely to forego the smaller, sooner punishment in favor of pushing that off to a later date. The phrase kicking the can down the road comes to mind. Really what kicking the can down the road is we are avoiding the smaller, sooner punishment and pushing that larger, later punishment to a future date. One needs to look no further than our tendency to avoid going to the dentist to see this principle at play. If given the choice, many people, even though they have health insurance, even though they have dental insurance, will avoid going to the dentist for a 6-month checkup. And the reason that they'll cite for doing so is because it's unpleasant. Going to the dentist is unpleasant, and we would consider it a smaller, sooner punisher. And most people, by engaging in this behavior, are ultimately leading themselves down the path of having a larger, later punisher, some sort of large dental issue in the future, because we didn't work through those smaller, sooner punishers. So let's look at some immediate versus delayed consequences. You're faced with the option, you can have a hamburger and fries for lunch or a salad for lunch. Most people are going to opt for the hamburger or fries over the salad. Hamburger and fries, a little bit more tasty than the salad, a little bit more enjoyable. And so the hamburger and fries is a smaller, sooner reward. And that smaller, sooner reward comes with some pretty significant consequences if that's your dining habit 5 days a week for the next 6 months, for example. You could have all kinds of health issues related to that. If we're eating a salad for lunch every day for 6 months, we probably are in a different situation. But the smaller, sooner reward is much, much more salient to us than the larger, later reward. And realistically, what it looks like is part of what reduces the value of that larger, later reward. So our salad for lunch, the larger, later reward is going to be continued health in the future. It looks like part of what's diminishing this value is time itself. There's lots of time, and as things get pushed out to the future, there's far less certainty. For example, you could just happen to have great metabolism, and then eating a hamburger and fries for lunch may or may not cause you to gain any weight at all, may or may not impact your future health at all. And because that larger, later issue is, well, that might or might not happen, then you're in a scenario where you are able to diminish the value of that larger, later situation, and the smaller, sooner reward becomes more prevalent. Additionally, this uncertainty in the future makes anecdotes and anecdotal evidence far more influential on your decision. We can look at smoking behavior as an excellent example of this. There are numerous reasons not to smoke cigarettes. They are very bad for your health, but it's not a guarantee. And any number of individuals, especially individuals who are smokers, have anecdotes of, well, so and so's grandma lived to be 96 years old and she smoked a pack of cigarettes a day, right? And so by having a situation where there's no guarantee that cigarette smoking causes you particularly to have lung cancer, and then having anecdotal evidence that confirms this, it leads us to reduce the value of the larger later reward from stopping smoking in favor of the smaller sooner reward, the impacts that smoking one cigarette individually has on an individual. When we look at this issue of smaller sooner reward versus larger later reward, as I kind of pointed out a moment ago, we start to then get at what is self-control versus what is impulsiveness. The person who picks the smaller sooner reward is probably going to be considered impulsive. The person who chooses the larger later reward is probably going to be considered to have a high level of self-control. And so then the real issue here with what is self-control truly is actually identifying what are the factors that are influencing that person with self-control to choose the larger later reward over the smaller sooner reward. What are they doing that allows them that level of control?